Story 1. This incident occurred about 1.5 years ago, but I recently learned how far my revenge reached. I was enlisted in the Navy and stationed in Yokosuka, Japan, for several years before being transferred back to the United States. I worked in the main hospital that provided care for service members and their families. It was a small hospital where everyone knew each other. Shortly after I left, I heard about a new physician officer working in the radiology department. My friends describe him as difficult to work with, but that wasn't unusual. However, someone saw him print a letter, leave it on his desk, and took a picture of it, which they sent to me. The letter was a request to move from enlisted housing to officer housing. To clarify, this wasn't a private letter. He actually sent it to the housing office, which is primarily run by enlisted members. For context, military housing is available to those who are married, have a family, or qualify based on their rank, depending on the specific military base. Typically, officer housing is much nicer than enlisted housing. In Yokosuka, however, housing is fairly uniform because it's overseas. Most of the housing consists of apartments, and each apartment complex is called a tower, such as Fuji Tower. There are 9 towers in total, 2 of which are designated for officers, as enlisted members significantly outnumber officers. One important aspect of military life is that when being stationed, it's the active duty member's responsibility to apply for housing, either on or off base, before arriving, depending on availability. If you fail to apply on time and there's limited space, you get placed wherever there's room. In this case, the new officer was placed in an enlisted tower. Keep in mind, enlisted members have families too, and other officers have been placed in enlisted housing before without any issues. Here are some quotes from his letter, and yes, this person holds a Doctor of Philosophy degree. I have many valid objections to living in a building predominantly occupied by enlisted members, including many lower-ranked enlisted members, as I am an officer. There is a significant amount of crime, violent behavior, drug use, and alcohol abuse that occurs in enlisted housing. There are also incidents of inappropriate behavior and other perverse actions. I have an attractive family, a wife and 2 daughters aged 3 and 4. They are prime targets to be victims of these enlisted deviant activities. My family deserves to be safe in housing designated for officers. Officers are much more respectable, and these types of deviant activities are incredibly rare compared to the common occurrences among enlisted members. Other officer families will not want to visit us because we live in enlisted housing. My children need to make friends with other officer children. My wife needs to form friendships with other officers' wives. I need to socialize with other officers. Forcing an officer to live in a large apartment building predominantly occupied by enlisted members is unethical. You get the idea. This person essentially looks down on all enlisted service members, assuming every single one is involved in substance abuse, inappropriate behavior, criminal activity, etc. The irony? He was an enlisted Army member before attending officer school. In civilian terms, imagine a manager who discriminates against and labels all of their subordinates as criminals, violent, alcoholics, perverts, drug users, etc., based solely on their job position. They forget that some of these people have families and might not fit any of these stereotypes. Moreover, this manager has the power to ruin your work life and your personal life, denying you days off, making you stay late, writing you up if they don't like you, and hindering your chances of promotion. Needless to say, everyone was upset, and I had nothing to lose. I was about to separate from the military and decided to have some fun before leaving. I created a fake Facebook account and posted the letter along with the officer's picture on a popular military enlisted group page. Within 2 days, it spread like wildfire. But I wasn't finished yet. The military has something called challenge coins. Think of them as collectible trading cards, but in the form of custom coins that come in various shapes and sizes. I designed one with the officer's face on one side and a big rude gesture on the other. Additionally, I created stickers to show how proud we deviants were. Other people also designed coins, but mine seemed to be the most popular. I sold over 70 coins to the person who originally sent me the picture at a heavily discounted price so she could sell them for a profit. As a result, the officer's face was displayed on coins all over the place because many people keep their coins on their desks. No matter where the officer went to work, he would see his face on someone's desk. Since the coin didn't have his name on it, I couldn't officially say it was him. I sold more coins stateside, and some even ended up in Europe. I made about $3,000 overall, which was nice. The story even made it to an online naval newspaper and 2 popular YouTube channels. If you're familiar with the military, you know that they only take action when something becomes too big to ignore. This story led to the officer being sent to captain's mast, which is like a Navy court. He tried to claim that his wife was the one who wrote the letter, but no one believed him because her writing style was much worse. She even tried to take the blame, but no one bought it. Both of them ended up deleting all their social media accounts. As a result of this, the officer was charged with 3 Uniform Code of Military Justice usage articles, which are essentially his offenses. But there's more. In the military, you have a deadline to reach a certain rank. If you don't achieve the next rank in time, you're discharged. Because this officer was new and had been charged with usage articles, he wouldn't be eligible for promotion and was therefore involuntarily separated. The officer program he went through also paid for his Doctor of Philosophy degree. When the military pays for your Doctor of Philosophy degree, you have to serve 10 years to repay the investment. If you don't complete the 10 years, you have to reimburse the military with money instead of time. So, not only did he lose his job, but he also has to pay back the military for his Doctor of Philosophy degree. And since it takes a while for the paperwork to go through to have him and his family sent back to the United States, you can bet he suffered socially because no one wanted to work with him. Story 2. This all happened 5 years ago when some of my friends were still in tourism college. In my country, part of the program involves a practical exam, which essentially means spending your summer vacation working as a semi-intern, paid below minimum wage. However, since it's tourism, they got to work in vacation settings, which was a bit of a perk. Their job title was something along the lines of house representative. The agency they worked for would make contracts with small apartment owners, usually with 15 rooms, and resell these apartments as part of various tourist packages. My friend's job was to show guests around and be on call 24/7 in case any of the guests needed assistance. The houses were scattered around the city, or even in different cities, making it difficult to get to them, especially since the agency was run by a greedy person who rarely provided any means of transportation. This meant that if only 2 guests needed something, it could take over an hour just to walk from one place to another. So, how did their daily routine look? Twice a week, they had income from new guests. The agency would usually transport these guests by plane and bus, so it was just one big group arriving at once. My friends would simply say, "This is your apartment, there's the store, and there's the beach. Call me if you need anything." Most of the time, this process was straightforward. However, there was another, more challenging group, referred to as the self-transport group. This group of guests would arrive in their own cars or by other means of transport. They usually had time windows like hotels, where check-in time is from 12 p.m. to 4 p.m. The main difference was that these houses didn't have receptions, so my friends essentially served as the reception staff. The timetable was more of a guideline for them to know when they would be welcoming guests between 12 and 4. I know all of this because my friends invited me to visit the tourist location, which was by the sea and quite beautiful. I got to stay for free, as they had spare beds in their apartment. I only had to spend money on food and nightlife, and I ended up shadowing my friends while they worked, often eavesdropping out of boredom. One day, they had to welcome guests at a very nice villa resort located on the outskirts of the city. The place was beautiful and expensive, with some parts still under development since it was relatively new. One villa was finished and polished, though it was missing some minor cosmetic touches outside, but the rooms were amazing. The check-in time was from 12 to 4, and we were expecting 12 families. By 2 p.m., all but one family had checked in, so we were just waiting for the last one before we could go get something to eat. The resort was so expensive that we couldn't afford to eat there. It was 8 p.m., and the last family still hadn't arrived, and they hadn't provided a mobile phone number, only a landline number from a different country, 1,400 kilometers, 900 miles away. This was back in 2016. My friend and I were as hungry as street dogs by that point. A third friend joined us, and he had a vehicle as he was transporting goods to another city. He invited us to go with him so we could grab something to eat. Of course, the moment we took our first bite, we got a call from the 12th family, who had arrived shortly after. When we got back to the resort, they were waiting outside their room in an SUV. The SUV was brand new and expensive, but it was registered in a small town known for its rough residents. Before my friend could even say, "Hi, how are you?" the complaints started pouring in: insults, foul language, the works. The man looked like someone who had taken a construction worker and given him a designer wardrobe and a limitless credit card. His wife was even worse, the epitome of a difficult person. Together, they were a nightmare. They complained about everything, claiming that everything was half finished, which wasn't true, and that there were cables hanging everywhere that their child might touch and get hurt, which were their exact words. They also mentioned that the fence around the villa was unfinished and that there was construction equipment nearby. This part was true, but the equipment wasn't in use at the time and was just sitting in the back. The man went on about how he had worked in construction his whole life and didn't want to see construction equipment anywhere near him. After all the complaints, my friend asked if he could show us where these so-called cables were located. It turned out they weren't cables at all, they were radiator pipes not yet connected to radiators. Considering it was summer, they wouldn't be needed anyway. And the child who might get hurt? She was actually a teenager around 13 to 15 years old, just sitting in the car. We hadn't seen her earlier because we were too busy dealing with the barrage of insults, even though I was just a bystander and told them I had nothing to do with it. In conclusion, they felt they had been swindled and claimed, "This apartment is not up to our luxury lifestyle standards." They wanted their money back, but we couldn't do anything about that, as the agency office was in another city about 1 to 1.5 hours away. They forced us to drive there so they could follow us and speak with the owner. When we arrived, they continued their outrageous behavior, yelling and insulting everyone, but this time in the middle of a very crowded city. What they didn't realize was that 2016 was an incredibly busy vacation year. Everything was booked for 2017, and we saw people begging for even a bit of shade. We left the agency office before they did. We had had enough. However, one of our colleagues later saw them sleeping in a tent on the beach for the next few days, and we were pretty sure they failed to find anything. So they probably had to turn around and make the 1,400-kilometer drive back home with 2 border crossings. Story 3. Background. A long time ago, my property was part of a large farm. I bought it about 30 years ago, long after the farm had been divided, but before any significant development had occurred nearby. The land I purchased was near the back entrance, which connected to a dirt road, while the more expensive plots were near the main road in the front. Initially, I bought a large piece of land with the intention of farming, but that plan never materialized. About 20 years ago, some of the landowners organized and had the area designated as a municipal suburb. The municipality agreed to install paved roads, water, and electricity if a certain percentage of the properties were developed. A construction company, connected to the organized owners, approached landowners who had undeveloped plots and offered to build houses at a very reasonable price, provided they got a minimum number of people to sign up. Around this time, one of the organized owners' members approached me with an offer to buy half of my property. I agreed, and the money I received, about 4 times what I had paid for the entire piece of land 10 years earlier, combined with a small bank loan, allowed me to build a fairly large and nice house. I lived in the house for a few years, and my mom moved in with me. I planned to subdivide the property again and build her a house next to mine, but unfortunately, An undiagnosed tumor took her life before construction could begin. Soon after she passed away, I moved out of the house and began renting it out. Just before I moved out, the organized owners member who had bought the land from me mentioned starting a homeowners association. I wasn't interested and left shortly afterward. About 2 years later, my neighbor from the organized owners contacted me. By then, there were 2 roads leading into the area. The original paved road near the old farmhouse, accessed from a busy main road, and my dirt road back entrance, which had been paved and connected to a quieter municipal road. The homeowner association wanted to close off the old farm road to improve security and reduce through traffic, making the road next to my property the main and only entrance to the homeowner association community. They pressured me to join, but I firmly declined. Eventually, they accepted my decision, but asked if they could place a sign near the road welcoming people to the neighborhood, and the only practical spot was on the edge of my property. They also wanted to build a small guard hut with a security guard permanently stationed to monitor who came and went, and they proposed placing the shed on my property. We reached an agreement where they would mow the lawn and pay me around $35 per month in exchange for using the land. I was pleased with this arrangement since the property was quite large, and it didn't cost them much as they already had a full-time gardening service for the homeowner association. This agreement was in place for over a decade. The homeowner association eventually succeeded in closing off the other main road, and they paid for security services to be stationed near my property while continuing to mow my lawn and cover the monthly payment. Occasionally, homeowner association members would contact me to try and persuade me to join, but I had no interest. My property had been rented to the same tenant for years, and everything was going smoothly. The incident? About 3 years ago, my tenant's young daughter was terrified when someone started making strange noises and firing a gun near her bedroom window several times over the course of a month. This understandably frightened my tenant, and, I suspect, the homeowner association as well. Both my tenant and the homeowner association approached me with a proposal. They asked me to join the homeowner association, offering exemptions from the homeowner association rules, including exemptions from paying monthly fees. Additionally, they promised to build a wall around the entire homeowner association neighborhood, complete with electric fencing and security cameras. They mentioned they had wanted to build the wall for some time, but were hesitant to do so on property not included in the homeowner association. Seeing no downside, I agreed. The dishonest dealings. It took a little over a year to build the wall and complete the project, which was quite fast. Exactly 1 month after everything was finished, my tenant received an homeowner association warning about his dog's barking. He reminded the homeowner association that the property was exempt from their rules, but they informed him that they had retroactively canceled the exemptions and that he had 30 days to comply. My tenant contacted me, and I opened some mail from the homeowner association that I had previously ignored, assuming I was exempt from their rules and fees. To my surprise, the homeowner association had retroactively canceled the exemptions and was demanding payment of late fees going back over a year, refund of the money they had paid for the easement over that period, repayment for the garden service mowing the lawn, compliance with homeowner association rules, with fines for each infraction my tenant failed to address. This initiated an expensive legal process involving lawyers and the court system, which ended with a judge ruling that the homeowner association had acted within their rights to revoke the exemptions, but they were required to give me 30 days' notice. As I was leaving the courthouse, the neighbor from the organized owners, who had bought half of my land years ago, told me I was foolish for refusing to join the homeowner association when it started, as I could have been a founding member, whatever that means, and advised me to understand documents better before signing them. The malicious compliance. The neighbor was right. I should have read the contract more carefully. Intrigued by the idea of being a founding member, which I later learned meant nothing, I went home and carefully reviewed the homeowner association contract I had signed, along with all the other documentation they had provided. I was determined to find loopholes to exploit. However, I didn't get past the first page. While the street address of the property is used for practical purposes, it has a unique property number in city records that must be used on legal documents. When my mom moved in, I subdivided the remaining property, but hadn't started building on it yet. When I granted the homeowner association the easement years ago, it had been on the property I had designated for my mom. When the homeowner association drafted the contract, they simply used the property number from the easement. The next afternoon, the neighbor delivered and had me sign for 2 documents, one notifying me that my exemptions would expire in 30 days, and the other informing me that the easement would no longer be required after 30 days. I think he was being a bit malicious because I lived about an hour away from the property, yet he drove out himself to deliver them. The revenge? Exactly 30 days to the hour after the homeowner association gave me notice, I knocked on the neighbor's door. Did I mention he was the homeowner association president, and had him sign for 2 documents. The first was my intention to build a house on my homeowner association property, which confused him, and the second was notice that they had 30 days to remove the guard shed, the parts of the electric gate that were on my property, and the sign. He tried to engage me, but I ignored him, got into my car, and drove off. Early the next morning, I received a call from the homeowner association lawyer, who explained that their structures would remain on my property since it was considered an unused part of my land. I explained that I was building a house there and that the land would no longer be unused. I could hear the smugness in his voice as he told me that building a second house out of spite would not be accepted by the courts. I'm sure he heard the satisfaction in my voice when I informed him that the property in question did not currently have a house, and was, in fact, only large enough for a small house to be built, with no room for additional structures. I then suggested he look up the property in question and call me back. I had carefully subdivided just enough land to meet the legal requirements for building. It took them just under 5 days to get back to me. Their lawyer informed me that the terms of the easement meant I could not cancel without their permission, so I emailed him a photo of the document they had sent me canceling the easement. That afternoon, the neighbor invited me to lunch as treat to discuss the issue. I politely declined. He extended the offer again 2 days later, and I again said, no thanks. Other members of the original organized owners contacted me, some sounding aggressive, others sympathetic. I responded with no thanks to each of them. Eventually, the lawyer called and asked if we could come to some sort of arrangement. When I asked what he had in mind, he suggested discussing exclusions in exchange for access to my property. I simply replied, no thanks, and please don't call me again. About 9 days before their 30 days were up, I received a call from a different lawyer who said he wanted to negotiate a surrender. His words, not mine. I agreed to meet him at his office the next day. I had already prepared documents, and the meeting was straightforward. I handed him the documents, and he read them over. My new easement offer included everything from the previous easement offer. A clause changing mow the lawn to get the property to homeowner association standards and maintain it, since it was now within the homeowner association. An increase in the monthly payment from $35 to $500. An inflation clause that the previous contract didn't include. A cancellation fee of around $7,500 if the contract was terminated for any reason. Automatic termination of the contract 30 days after. Any disciplinary action was taken against me, my tenant, or the property. Any complaints were lodged by the homeowner association against the property. Any legal action was taken against the property by anyone in the homeowner association. The lawyer who offered to negotiate surrender would mediate any disputes between us at the homeowner association's expense. The homeowner association would cover all my legal fees if any legal action was taken against me. I had deliberately included some extreme conditions so that I could appear to concede points or negotiate down the terms I actually cared about. The lawyer didn't seem pleased. He said my proposal sounded unfair, but he would have the homeowner association president review it. I reminded him that in 8 days I would be sending a team with sledgehammers and a lot of frustration to dismantle anything of theirs still on my property. That evening, I received an angry call from the homeowner association president. He said he would never sign the new contract, and I said, okay. He then complained that I was charging too much per month and that the rate should be the same as the previous contract. I pointed out that when I signed the previous contract, the area was still being developed, and there was another road leading in and out, but now there was only one. Moreover, my property was now fully developed with everything they needed. He accused me of forcing them to sign a document they didn't want to sign. I told him he was free not to sign it. He continued to complain about everything he could think of and eventually said I'd be hearing from his lawyer. The next morning, the surrender lawyer called to ask if I'd be willing to come to their offices to sign the contract. I agreed. When I arrived that afternoon, I learned that the surrender lawyer was actually a paralegal. He handed me the contract and asked me to sign it. He laughed when I told him I'd have to read through it first to make sure nothing had been changed and mumbled something like, "I'm sure you would." I read the contract carefully. Nothing had been altered, not a single thing, and the homeowner association president had signed it, with the surrender paralegal signing as a witness. I looked at him and said, "Why did he sign this? It was a terrible decision." The paralegal replied, "I started telling him that signing it would be a bad idea, but he told me I wasn't being paid to think or give legal advice, so I shut up." I asked, "Do you understand what he's signed here?" He nodded and said, "I asked him if I should have one of the lawyers review it before giving it to you, but he told me we'd already billed enough for this and that he'd sign it and sue me after their easement was secure." The aftermath. This happened about 1.5 years ago. It took 6 months for the homeowner association to realize how badly they were trapped. They wanted to sue me, but their lawyers explained that they had no way to win. Even if the court sided with them, all they would accomplish was voiding the easement contract, and they doubted the court would side with them. The lawyers were particularly concerned about one clause: the homeowner association paying my legal fees if legal action was taken against me, as it didn't limit the people taking legal action against me to the homeowner association. They argued that the courts might not enforce it, given the context of the agreement with the homeowner association, but I told them I was prepared to find out, as the homeowner association would be the ones taking action if they challenged it. I eventually signed an addendum to the contract stating that the neighbor the homeowner association president would personally cover all my legal fees, unless he held no position in the homeowner association, and that the homeowner association would cover all legal fees if they took legal action against me. The neighbor resigned from the homeowner association at the end of that meeting. I politely told him in front of everyone that he should not sign documents unless he understands what he's signing. He did not look pleased. During mediation, you cannot imagine how pleased the lawyers were that their paralegal was mediating. It was revealed that without control over access to the homeowner association neighborhood through the security gate partially on my property, the homeowner association had become a gated community a few years earlier. The homeowner association would be in breach of their own articles and would be dissolved. I also learned that all the security cameras were wired and terminated in the guardhouse shed. So, essentially, it was either my way or the end of the homeowner association. That first mediation session was quite amusing. My paralegal looked a bit downcast as we gathered, and he called everyone to order. I suspected he had been instructed to work against me, so I took the initiative. I reminded everyone that while I had agreed to let the paralegal mediate, I had not agreed to any arbitration. If I felt the proceedings were unfair, I would leave, and they could proceed with a lawsuit. The paralegal brightened up, and things actually went well. I'm writing this after returning home from the latest mediation. I built a paddling pool for the neighborhood dogs. I made it myself, digging a hole, packing it with stone, and adding a concrete finish. It was my first attempt, and frankly, it looked, well, terrible. The homeowner association called for a mediation meeting. They now do this instead of taking official action to politely inform me that the paddling pool was an eyesore right at the entrance of the homeowner association. I asked them to create a list of what needed to be fixed and how it needed to be fixed, and to give it to me at the next meeting. The list was extensive, requiring the pool to be rebuilt from scratch. I asked if there was any way to reduce the costs of the work they required to bring it up to homeowner association standards, and they assured me there was not. I thanked them, pulled out a copy of the agreement where they had agreed to get the property to homeowner association standards, which I had highlighted, and handed it to them along with the list. I told them the homeowner association usually preferred if these things were dealt with within 30 days. They began to argue until the mediator reminded them that they could not force me to comply without voiding the easement. I should mention that their lawyers rarely attend these meetings anymore. They agreed to get it done. I also learned some interesting things about my neighbor today. The neighbor sold his property about 3 months ago and is apparently moving to Australia. The homeowner association successfully sued him for a substantial amount of money they lost due to his mismanagement as part of his vendetta against me. He apparently held a grudge against me, though I have no idea what I did to upset him. I'm not sure if I will continue to mess with the homeowner association. I feel like I'm close to breaking them, and the only thing keeping them from canceling the contract is the massive financial loss if they do. A lot will depend on how they treat me and my tenants going forward. That said, I do enjoy the monthly payments, so I'm inclined to play nice for now. Story 4. I work at a well-known home supply and maintenance store. I won't mention the name, just to be safe. To set the scene, about a month ago, a woman, who I'll refer to as Karen, and her husband came in to buy an appliance. Unfortunately for them, it was a particularly busy day, and we only had 2 people working in the appliance section, one of whom was about to go on her lunch break. Apparently, Karen wasn't pleased that a couple of men who had already been waiting were served before her, and she threw a fit. She even went as far as approaching the girl who was leaving for her lunch break. The girl was no longer in uniform and was chatting with another employee, but Karen berated her for ignoring her. Despite being told multiple times that the girl was off the clock, Karen insisted that it didn't matter and demanded help immediately. The girl then told her she could either wait or take her business elsewhere and proceeded to leave. This response seemed to infuriate Karen and her husband. Her husband then called customer service, where I happened to be covering the desk, and he began yelling at me, declaring that he was a grown man and that if we were going to serve other men before his wife, we would serve him first. I couldn't help but laugh at his outburst and told him that's not how things work. Then, I hung up the phone. In our store, we don't tolerate abuse, and the managers generally back us up on this. Here's the funny part. Our town has a local Facebook page where people can post reviews and events, and Karen decided to make a massive post about what happened. Only, she didn't tell the truth. She twisted the story to make it seem like she had been purposely ignored. She just didn't want to wait in line. Denied service she had confronted and cursed out a teenage employee who was off the clock, and that she and her husband had been verbally abused by every employee in the store, when in reality, they had only spoken to the girl and to me, and neither of us had abused them. If anything, we were the ones being mistreated. At first, Karen's post garnered sympathy from a lot of women with a similar mindset. There were plenty of "no one wants to work anymore" comments. However, one of our cashiers heard about the post and showed it to me. Now, I'll admit it, I can be petty. So, I created a fake Facebook account. I'm not much into social media beyond lurking on Reddit, and joined the town's page. I first commented on Karen's post, providing explicit details about what actually happened, including direct quotes from the other girl. Then, to drive the point home, I copied my post and replied to every comment on her post with, "This isn't actually what happened. What happened was insert comment here." Within moments, the entire town turned against her. Hundreds of comments called her out as a liar and a terrible person. The next morning, the post was gone, and Karen has never returned to our store. Was I a bit of a Karen myself? Maybe, but when it comes to my fellow employees, I believe in fighting fire with fire. Thanks to this situation and several others, since then I've become the go-to person for dealing with difficult customers when my coworkers can't get a hold of a manager. No way this can end badly, right? Story 5. So, this might be one of the most petty things I've ever done, but it was worth it. Recently, I was heading to a friend's birthday party. Their community had the most confusing main road setup, where you could easily think you're on the right path, only to end up in a completely different part of the neighborhood. My friend's house was about half a mile in, and I accidentally went straight when I should have followed the main road to the right. After about 5 to 10 minutes of driving around in circles, I realized I was in the wrong neighborhood entirely. The problem was that my massive car couldn't make a U-turn on the narrow road without crushing someone's lawn or mailbox. So I decided to back into a driveway to make a 3-point turn. As I was backing into the driveway, a woman came storming out of the house. Let's call her Karen. Karen, what do you think you're doing in my driveway? Me? I just need to make a U-turn, ma'am. Karen, why in my driveway? Me. The road is too small for my car to make a U-turn. Karen, I'm calling the police. This is trespassing. Before I could even respond, Karen pulls out her phone and calls the police, all while blocking my car with herself and her trash can. By this point, I'm getting really frustrated because I'm already 15 minutes late to the party. The police arrive, and they immediately tell her that it's not illegal to make a 3-point turn in someone's driveway. You'd think that would be the end of it, but nope. Karen is fuming and starts yelling right in my ear about how I'm not going to get away with this. The police quickly shut her down and pull her aside. I overheard them telling her that she had called them out for this kind of thing twice before, once for a guy who had simply walked by with a stroller. They warned her that if she did it again, she'd be arrested for abusing the emergency line. Karen, of course, started ranting about how this was a misuse of power and that she'd be speaking with the sheriff. The officers just rolled their eyes and told me I was free to go. They drove off, and I thought that was the end of it. But when the police were out of sight, Karen refused to move her trash can, which was still sitting right in front of my car. She kept ranting and even started kicking my car door. Here's where my petty side kicked in. I opened the car door, intentionally hitting her in the side with it gently, but enough to make a point, then walked over to her trash can and placed it right in the middle of the street. After that, I went back to my car, pulled up the emergency brake, and did a burnout on her driveway, leaving some nice black tire marks as a parting gift. Then I just drove off, leaving her with a trash can in the street and a driveway that looked like a racetrack. Later, she tried to accuse me of vandalism, but that didn't go anywhere. I did get a ticket for reckless driving because of the burnout, but I disputed it in traffic court and won. Karen learned that day that sometimes it's better to just let people make their U-turns and move on with your life.